Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this segment, as they say on TV, this segment of the Wolverine Caucus. We like to think that our forums are changing the world one forum at a time. I'm Veronica Wilkerson Johnson, Director of the University of Michigan Lansing Office, under the Office of the Vice President for Government Relations. And speaking of that, these forums are generously provided to you by the Office of the Vice President for Government Relations and the Michigan Alumni Association. We're glad that you're here today, and we're going to talk about a very important topic: UM intellectual property and new jobs creation. What a timely topic, as many cities this month are looking at how they go forward here in Michigan. And I'm going to bring a special person to the podium at this time to introduce our speaker. We have with us State Representative Adam Zemke, 55th District, the great city of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Go Blue. Of course, Representative Zemke may have other colors as well he'd like to herald as he comes forward. And without further ado, and also we'd like to acknowledge that we have Interim Provost Jack Bergeron joining us from Lansing Community College. So thank you again, and please, Representative Zemke.
I always like to tease Cynthia Wilbanks, who, for those of you who don't know, heads up government relations for the University of Michigan, about my Michigan State connection. And I'm proud that our speaker today actually has one as well, although I think his degrees are a little bit more esteemed than mine. Dr. Molnar is the Associate Director for the U of M Institute for Research on Labor, Employment, and the Economy, and I'm proud to say that he is a Spartan alum, therefore, again, solidifying that the University of Michigan hires the best and the brightest. And he is a BA in journalism and an MA in telecommunication management from MSU, and of course a doctorate from the University of Michigan School of Information. I apologize. During his 27 years at the U of M, Dr. Molnar has really solidified himself as an expert in the field of incubator information research, and of course bringing those to fruition for additional job creation, new job creation in our great state. John is currently leading a program in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana that is designed to repurpose closed manufacturing facilities, obviously something that's very applicable to Michigan as our economy changes into the 21st century new economy. He's also the principal investigator for the NOAA-funded economic impact study of the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary in Lake Huron and the NOAA National Marine Sanctuary in American Samoa. He's published and presented numerous research studies and papers on the range of economic development and IT issues, including the state of the business incubator industry in Michigan and in the U.S. And one of the things that I am particularly excited that he's working on is ways that we can understand where our gap is in terms of job demand and what we can do to improve the supply side from the incubator perspective. And I had a chance to talk with him briefly about that before we arrived. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our esteemed speaker. Thank you very much, Dr. Molnar.
Well, I'll make Adam feel right at home here. I told him that he went to Pioneer High School in Ann Arbor, where my kids graduated from, and I guess he made his way here by a bit of a circuitous route, but he's a pioneer up here, or at least he has been for 8 weeks now. 9, okay. So as I told him, he's a freshman again. This will be the third time: high school, college, and now in your career. Before I really get started into the real core subject matter of what I want to talk about, give you just a little bit of an overview. I've been at the university 27 years, going on my 28th year. Most of the work that I've done and that we do in our institute is either looking at areas that are experiencing economic distress or looking for opportunities for communities, for regions. We do a lot of work with private sector companies. So I'll run through a few slides that'll give you a bit of an overview on some of our programs and then launch into the subject matter. We have a Center for China Employment and Labor Relations. We have a China expert who goes to China. China doesn't have unions, and they don't have collective bargaining, and so the management labor relations there are much different. And so the University of Michigan has a State Department funded program to train mediators who actually help solve labor disputes. There are over 1 million strikes or labor actions in China every single year. So when you start to peel the thing back a little bit, there's still a lot of turbulence in the labor management, if you will, relationships in China. So we're over there helping to address that. The Center for Business Acceleration and Incubation Studies, which I direct, do a lot of work in Michigan and around the country, sometimes internationally, with small business incubators. And one of the things that we do in Michigan is the due diligence. I've helped us launch an incubator at Alpena Community College, West Shore Community College, Mid-Michigan Community College. There's one in Owasso. I could go on, but business incubation, getting new startup companies and putting them in a facility with a lot of programmatic support is a very effective economic development tool and job creation strategy if it's done properly. Have the Center for Labor Market Research. Some of you might or know the name, at least George Fulton and Don Grimes, who do a lot of the econometric forecasting for the state. They're usually predicting things on a monthly basis, so they're part of our institute. The Great Lakes Trade Adjustment Assistance Center is a federally funded program that works with companies that are hurt by imports, manufacturing companies. We work in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana. Yes, we actually go down there to Columbus, Ohio with our Michigan staff vehicles, park them backwards so nobody can see the license plate. But that's been a very successful program. As a matter of fact, just as an aside, I was several years ago when Governor Strickland was the governor of Ohio. I was at a meeting with him and some of his agency people, and at the end of the meeting, when I stood up, I said, "Governor, just before I leave, I want to show you something." And I showed him my coat. And he said, "If I had known you had that, you never would have gotten into the room." And then technology and commercialization assistance, which is what I'm going to talk about at some length. I mentioned the Center for Business Acceleration and Incubation Studies. Again, we do these market and feasibility studies. We ask the question, is there sufficient demand in the marketplace for what we're proposing to do? In this case, the market demand are entrepreneurs. Are there enough entrepreneurs, home-based businesses, people who want to start their own businesses in the region, sufficient to say we're going to make an investment or ask for a grant for $1.5 million or $2 million to buy a facility or build a facility that can house new startup businesses? So if there is demand, is it feasible to meet that demand if we know what it is? And then how do we get the doors open? What's the business plan to get the doors open? And then what is the operating plan to keep the doors open, to keep this thing sustained over time? So we're constantly doing these studies. One of the things that we do in addition to surveying the entrepreneurs, and you might say, okay, up in Alpena, where do you find entrepreneurs? And I like to survey between 300 and 400. Where in the world are you going to find 300 or 400 potential entrepreneurs up in the woods around Alpena? Well, one of the sources is we go to the county clerk's office. We draw a radius of about 15 or 20 miles around where we think the incubator is going to be located, which usually picks up 3 or 5 counties. Then we go to the county clerk's office, and if you want to start a business in Michigan, you have to go to the county clerk's office, pay your $25 fee, and register your business. So we get the list from the county clerk's office, and usually there's 1, 2, 3,000. We go back a couple of years. And then we cull out, we're not looking for pizza parlors, we're not looking for nail salons or beauty parlors. So from that subset, we have a population of potential entrepreneurs. We also work very closely, mark my words, with Michigan State University, because MSU Extension has an extension agent in almost every single county in the state, and they do a lot of mentoring and advising and guiding small businesses. We also work with the SBTDCs, the Small Business and Technology Development Center, the SBA-funded program, and there are counselors all over the state, and they provide us with names too. So we go out and we survey the entrepreneurs, find out what they need in terms of both a facility and a program. And we also survey all the professional service providers, the attorneys, the accountants, people with packaging, marketing, distribution expertise, because you have to have not just a building. If it's just a building, you're running a real estate operation, just collecting rent and keeping the lights on. You need to have experts in different areas that can help these small businesses get started, mature, grow, move out of the incubator so you can move new ones in. So if you have 20 companies in there and they stay for 2 to 3 years, over a 10-year period, you're going to move 80 to 100 companies out. I did a study of the Michigan business incubation industry and found that after 5 to 10 years after a company exits the incubator, 87% of the business are still in business. That's a very high survival rate. 85% of them were still in the region in which the incubator was located, so they tend to stick at home. So again, when done right, business incubation can be a very effective tool. I mentioned the Center for Labor Market Research. George Fulton and Don Grimes constantly looking at where jobs are being created. I think their latest forecast indicated that there were going to be about 55 to 60,000 jobs created in Michigan this year. I think on the other side of the coin, there are a lot of employers that are saying we can't find the workers with the appropriate skills. So I think there might be a bit of a mismatch there, although I do think that Lansing, the governor's office, is addressing that. They just hired recently a woman that I know who ran one of the Michigan Works agencies in South Michigan, Christine Quinn, and she's very attuned to the demand for workers, which are the employers, and the supply of trained workers, which comes out of, to a large extent, the community college system. So instead of sending somebody for 2 years to get a lot of English lit courses and history courses who wants to be a welder, let's get them certified as a welder and get them into an employer. I see the acting provost is nodding his head, but I think the community college infrastructure in the state is a very, very important part of where the state goes in the future economically. I mentioned the Great Lakes Trade Adjustment Assistance Center. Again, we work with small to medium-sized manufacturers that are making, let's say, a hydraulic pump, and that pump is coming in from Canada or Mexico or India. And the U.S. manufacturer is losing contracts, losing revenue, laying off people. Well, we go in and do what we call a diagnostic analysis, which is to analyze all aspects of the company's operation. And once we understand where the deficiencies are, the gaps are, the opportunities are, we put together what we call an adjustment plan, which is really a set of projects that are a turnaround strategy. And then with our federal research dollars, we pay for half of the cost of an engineering firm to come in and design a new product, a marketing firm to come in and help them address a new market, a training company to come in and train the employees on quality control or lean manufacturing, whatever the case might be. We've had this program for 29 years now. We measure success as these companies that are starting to fail. What happens to them 5 to 10 years after they exit the program? Over 95% of the companies are still in operation 5 to 10 years after they exit the program, and they're in the program for 2 to 3 years. So that's something that's worked very well over the years, and it keeps us in touch with a lot of small to medium-sized manufacturers in the region. This MBS to T thing, what we did about 7 years ago now, maybe 8, about the time that we saw the, I guess what eventually turned out to be a semi-collapse of the automotive industry, and we could see that coming. At the time, for instance, General Motors, we're talking about 2005, 2006, was cash rich. They had, I think at the time, about $35 billion in the bank. They were just sitting on all this money. But if you kind of turn the page a little bit, they were losing almost $1 billion a month. Every quarter, they were reporting losses of $2 billion, $3 billion. All you had to do was the simple math, and you could see the wall coming. Sure enough, same with Chrysler. Ford got to the banks just in time before the banks closed, because the banks stopped lending, especially in the automotive industry. Ford borrowed, I think it was $33 billion, $35 billion. Most people don't know this, but Ford, up until recently, did not own its land, did not own its equipment, did not own its patents, its trademarks, or anything else. The banks did. They collateralized they bet the company on the loan. They're buying it back. They're paying it back at $4 billion a shot every so often. They just bought back the Ford Oval about 4 months ago. So they own that now. So we went to the former administration here in Lansing and said, these small to medium-sized manufacturers, we know how to work with companies that are hurting for one reason or another. Give us a little money and we'll help Michigan companies. We ended up with over 200 companies, created a lot of jobs. It was a very successful program. You can see that 9,000 jobs retained. At $290 a job, which is dirt cheap when you start talking about keeping people working. We created 60% of the companies we worked with, and this is in the middle of the recession, added new employees. 10%, the employment remained stable. The other 30% were down 4% versus about 18% for the average Michigan manufacturer at the time. And the jobs that we created cost around $3,000 a job. The federal government, Department of Labor, considers $10,000 to $40,000 an acceptable range to create a medium to high wage, medium to high skilled job. So we were doing it for literally pennies on the dollar, if you will. Again, this is kind of how the population broke out in terms of the types of companies that we worked with. And we got to know these companies quite well. They were all really troubled. There's a score called a Z-score, which is an amalgam of different financial ratios. I think there's 20 financial ratios. And if you have a Z-score of 2.5 to 3, you have a 90% probability of being insolvent within 12 to 18 months. Almost all our companies had Z-scores within that range, and we lost 2 companies over the 6-year period. So it worked really well. So this gets us to my topic today. I've used up a little bit of time just kind of leading up to this, but let me set the stage a little bit of background. In this country, just in colleges and universities, the federal government spends about $35 billion a year in research. If you start looking at the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, and the federal labs, Oak Ridge, Lawrence Livermore, Los Alamos, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, I don't think anybody knows quite how much money we spend on research as a country every year. It's probably hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. And there's a tremendous amount of intellectual property that's developed as a result of this research. Patents, discoveries, technologies. And the traditional way of capitalizing or commercializing this research, in not just in Michigan, but I think nationally, is we have a new technology, let's start a new company. Let's try to put a management team together and then go out and try to raise some capital from angel investors or from venture capitalists. And then we'll get that first round of funding. You're going to burn through that before you start making a profit, no question. And then after you burn through that, there's a space there that's called the Valley of Death. You have to walk through the Valley of Death until you get your second round of funding. And then as you slowly move, if you survive to some maturity where you're stable and you can start adding employees, it's a pretty longitudinal process. And it's very risky. So because we knew these companies so very well, we decided, and I'm an information scientist, so I see that kind of as an information transfer thing. Why don't we look at some of our companies that we think have a high potential to take on intellectual property? So we developed a protocol, a little bit of a methodology, some criteria against which we could measure companies to determine the ones that had some characteristics that we thought would lead them maybe to success. So the concept here is, instead of taking a technology and starting a company around it, it's finding out what a company needs in terms of opportunities, diversification, entering a new product or market area. That's the demand side of it. Going over to the supply side, which is the intellectual property at the University of Michigan, at least at first, and pulling it out of the university rather than trying to push it out. So that's kind of the background. Here are some of the criteria that we developed to measure whether or not a company was a good candidate. Are they financially stable? Because we're going to ask them to cost share this. I'm going to pay for half the cost of it out of my program, but the company's going to have to pay for half of the cost too. Are they committed to growth? Do they have a good, strong management team? Not only strong, but is it complete? If they're missing in management, a senior engineer or PhD or somebody who can speak about the technical aspects of what they're looking for, then we can't work with them. If there's a lack in marketing or over in finance or something, we won't work with them because we don't think that they can succeed. We'll give them some advice about come back in 6 months if you've got this gap filled, but the technical capability and capacity. What I mean by that is we have to talk science with these companies. We can't just talk about you're interested in polymers. That's great. We'll go back to the University of Michigan and find out if anybody's doing any work in polymers. Well, we probably have 3,000 experiments going on with polymers at the University of Michigan, and probably 150 faculty members that are doing something with them in material science and chemical engineering. So I need to know the molecular structure of the polymer you're talking about. I need to know the substrate that it's going to adhere to. I need to know the thermal conditions under which it has to operate, et cetera, et cetera. Once I get that information, I can take that back to our specialists in the technology transfer office, and then they can search their portfolio for that molecular structure, for a faculty member or a postdoc or a lab that's dealing with the substrates and the thermal conditions, and then we can get the company and the faculty member and the scientists together, and in my experience, you get them in the room and they start talking and they start writing things on the whiteboard that nobody understands except them, and it takes about a half hour to see if we've got a match. And then they have to be willing to work with an outside organization such as a university, because we're going to need to know their financials and a lot about them if we're going to be able to help them. So we do this this research with the companies to find out what it is that they're looking for, the opportunity they're looking for, the area of technology they're interested in. Obviously, we do this financial review, and they have to open their books to us. We spend a full day at the company interviewing the management team and vetting them, if you will. The technical review to really find out scientifically what it is that they're looking for. Then we can go back and do that technology search where we sit down with one of our technology transfer officers over at up there on the North Campus Research Center, the former Pfizer complex, and Ken Nisbet, who directs our technology transfer office, and his folks are very knowledgeable and very helpful. And then we get that technical discussion going. So my program, which is funded by the state of Michigan, by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, is really facilitating this process of going out, finding out where the need is in companies, the demand side of it, then going back to the supply side, which is in the university, and seeing if we can come up with a match. And to me, again, that's kind of an information transfer process. It's a translation function, if you will. So in terms of what we need to do, there are costs associated with this. So what we're trying to do with this technology commercialization assistance is take something from a laboratory bench in the university, get it on the floor in the laboratory to make sure that it's manufacturable or that it's going to work, and then get it to a bench in the company where they can experiment and refine it a little bit, get it on the floor, the production floor in the company, so we're certain that at the company level it's manufacturable, or if it's a software product, or whatever the case might be. And there are costs associated with all of those steps. So we're paying for half of the cost. paying the faculty member, paying the postdoc, paying the lab fees, whatever the case might be, and we're invoicing the company to pay the other half. So it's a 50-50 cost share, although that's a little bit flexible. We can be a little bit flexible if we feel we need to go 60-40 or 70-30 one way or the other. We define the scope of work before we get engaged with all this, so everybody understands. We're all reading off the same page, and it is a contractual arrangement to execute the scope of work. And then as things move along, we monitor the progress and make sure that the outcomes and deliverables are there, that we're meeting the milestones, and basically move it along. I'm going to give you a few examples. There's a paper, and some of these are just generic, the generic titles of the companies are real companies, and there's a couple of companies that have allowed us to use their name, so you'll see a couple of those. This was a company in southwest Michigan, paper manufacturer. There used to be a lot of paper manufacturers in Michigan, and there's very few left. And this one was in danger of being closed because their product just wasn't competing. We found a technology, highly compressible fluid dynamics, pressurized spray for coatings and things like that. And I'm only the principal investigator on this. I have technical staff that really gets into this stuff, so don't ask me any questions that are technical. The definition of a principal investigator is the person that gives the credit to the good hard work that the people do on the team, and the person that gets the blame if anything goes wrong. And if it goes really wrong, it's adios. I'll be bunking with Kwame Kilpatrick. So with our program, the company and U of M faculty define that scope of work to solve the technical issue. We got matched the funds 50-50, and progress to date, phase one is complete. It's doing what they hoped it would do, and we're now modeling the firm's performance and what have you, and the company is open. Their headquarters feels that they're in the right direction, where they were going to close the plant and lay off 120 people. The plant's still operating, and this is about 18 months after we got the thing going. Here's an electronics company in the Upper Peninsula. One of the things that they were doing was strengthening their core business. They had a relationship with the Department of Defense. We helped with that, and one of their contracts there, and they it was had to do with replacing printed circuit boards with what they call light wave guides. So actually using protons instead of electrons on circuit boards to perform different functions in aircraft. So we found the intellectual property at the University of Michigan. We also worked with Michigan Tech on this one, and between the two universities, we came up with a solution for the company. So, as you can see by reading that, this SBIR is the Small Business Innovation Research that's programmed by the federal government, where a certain amount of money is set aside for smaller companies. We helped them get an SBIR grant and got students involved and what have you. And again, that technology is very advanced and working quite well. Company up in Petoskey helped them strengthen their core business. They are a thin film producer, plastics. We found some technology. We had nothing at the University of Michigan. We knew Michigan State was doing something in this area, so we talked to the Technology Transfer Office at Michigan State. They did have some intellectual property, and we licensed it out of Michigan State. So again, went through the scope of work. The MIIE gave us our first round of funding. That's the Michigan Initiative for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. I got it right. Which is a program of all 15 state universities. Some money's been set aside, and universities can apply for a grant. That's kind of how we got our thing kicked off. So have some students, laboratories, and faculty members at Michigan State University. And what this is leading into a little bit is we didn't intend for this to be just a University of Michigan thing, that it's only University of Michigan IP we're interested in. We're interested in all 15 state universities to the extent that they have technology and intellectual property that's available. So that project's going well. So as we work with these companies and find out more about them, we also get exposed to their supply chain, where they either buy or sell, and we're meeting more and more companies. This is Omega Plastics. Again, got into the interview process to find out what their technical needs were, did the search, found a small company that could use their assistance. So now we're linking Omega Plastics up with a student startup out of the University of Michigan. And I'll do this very quickly because it's really a great story. There's a program up in engineering. It's an entrepreneurship program for undergraduates. So there was a young woman, actually she was from India, who in her senior year, under the special program, they send a small team, 3 to 5 students, to a foreign country for a month to go into an organization to identify needs. They went to Ghana, and they went to a hospital in Ghana. And they identified very quickly 3 needs. One of them was they had a nursery that had usually about 100 infants, newborns in it, and they had 2 nurses on staff at any one time. Impossible to monitor all these little kids. So they designed a receptor and a little transmitter and a little device that could be placed on the child's skin somewhere that measured temperature, respiration, and a couple other vital signs. And if something wasn't going well, a little light would go on. So they helped solve that problem. Another problem, and the one that really captured my attention, was surgery was under very, very primitive conditions. And that there's no blood banks, there's no blood transfusions, nothing available. So the only way that when a patient with open cavity surgery needs blood is you have to use the patient's blood. And what they were literally doing was they were taking a soup ladle, scooping the blood out of the cavity, pouring it through gauze into like a mason jar, and then pouring that into an open IV bag that fed back into the veins. So they came up with a syringe that had a little filter in it to filter out the clots, that they could take it up, turn the valve, and then inject it into a port of an IV bag that was closed. And what's going on here with Omega Plastics is they're manufacturing it, and it had to meet conditions for an autoclave because it had to be sterilized. And so to get the price down so that you didn't have to use one every single operation to be able to sterilize it, it had to meet certain thermal conditions, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, the students came back, designed the thing, got Omega to manufacture it, and it's now being sold in foreign countries, or in developing countries. So that's what's going on with that one. So where we are now with the technology commercialization assistance, we went through that first grant, the MIIE grant. We got a second grant through a couple of the smart zones in Michigan for about $500,000, and we just got a 3-year, $1 million grant from MEDC, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, to continue this and to expand it a little bit. I will tell you that this has been an experiment. There's really no other model that I'm aware of or that anyone has told me about anywhere, either in universities or in the federal system. And I am talking to the Department of Energy, to NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I have a meeting. I'm in Washington next week, so I'm meeting with the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Defense, the Department of Commerce, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, to talk about, is this a model that could work at the federal level? The National Institutes of Standards and Technology out in Gaithersburg, Maryland, has a 180-acre campus with 2,000 PhDs working constantly on doing new things and inventing new stuff. They have a tremendous trove of intellectual property that's sitting on shelves. I see this as kind of a maybe an untapped resource, maybe a real gold mine, if you will, for this country, to move our economy forward and to create jobs by utilizing and commercializing the investments that have been made by the public sector with your tax dollars, and move it from the public sector to the private sector into for-profit companies that, under a capitalist system, will make money, but they're going to need skilled people to produce and to program and all the ancillary legal and marketing and other things that need to go along with taking something that's an abstract intellectual property, if you will, and through that process that we've developed, turn it into something that's creating wealth for individuals, for regions, for local economies, and really realizing a return on our investment, if you look at it that way. We've made the investment, and now how can we achieve the greatest return? And for some things, starting a new company is absolutely the best way to go. It may be the only way to go. But I think that there's an awful lot of other opportunity out there by using existing companies. I use the analogy, if I want to get across town, I can either go out and rent a car or buy one, or I can build one to get where I want to go. And if you're a startup company, you're building something, and it's going to take some time to get where you want to go. If you just hop on a car that's already built, you're going to get there a lot faster and probably a lot cheaper and a lot more efficiently. So I think we have something going. Currently, we have intellectual property licensed out of University of Michigan, Michigan State, Michigan Tech, Grand Valley State University, Eastern Michigan University, and Western Michigan University. So I was counting, but that's either 7 or 8 state universities. We have 15 of them, so we have a few more to go. But I definitely anticipate that by the end of our current 3-year grant, hopefully we'll have things going with every single state university, and hopefully maybe some federal labs and federal agencies also. So it's a lot of fun, meet a lot of new people. We're doing something that can and is making a difference, and that's about it. I thank you for asking me to come and sitting here and listening to my diatribe, but I get passionate about this stuff, but it is making a difference. So thanks a lot. If there's any questions, I'll answer them.
I have a faculty question. Are there both incentives and disincentives for faculty participation in the commercialization process, and do promotion and tenure decisions work their way into faculty members' participation or not?
There are definitely incentives. The faculty member, and I'll be wrong on this, so don't quote me, but I think up to the first $250,000 or $300,000, it might be 50-50, and then it goes to 30%. Then after $1 million or $2 million, it's down to 25%. But there is a revenue stream coming back to the inventor. We don't want our faculty to go out and quit their research and leave campus and start a company. So we want to retain them, and most of them spent their whole life preparing for their careers. And so we've tried to facilitate the formation of a company, and our technology transfer office does that. As far as the tenure question, not a lot yet, but I think that there's increasing encouragement from funders of universities and colleges to do that. Here at the state of Michigan, if the state of Michigan said, if you incorporate 10% of tenure decision on whether or not there's some service being made through a program like technology commercialization, we'll give you 10% more in your allocation from the state. That might catch somebody's attention. I don't know, but I think it's slowly turning around. The expectation of universities, and I think Veronica could second me on this, is that universities are going to get engaged. They have to be out there doing economic development and working in communities, and not just staying on campus and handing out degrees every spring. And I think this is part of it. This is a great example of a university being out in the private sector, helping create jobs, helping the economy, utilizing its resources to do so. There's a question over here somewhere. Well, there's not a lot of research. There might be some good applied research. And for instance, Ferris, you'd think, well, Ferris, they have a lot of intellectual property. Well, yeah, they do. They do a lot of material science and things like that. What I think what the need is at the community college level is, let's take nanotechnology. We're just finishing constructing a $100 million nanomechanical laboratory building on campus. Okay, so, and there's nanotechnology going into everything. Cosmetics and everything else. What's a nanotechnology technician? What are the skills required? And what do we have to teach? What kind of a curriculum do we have to develop? Because we're going to need nanotechnology technicians. Somebody can operate the equipment and run the experiments and maintain the equipment and what have you. We don't need somebody with a 4-year degree to do that, but they're going to have some very specific skills. And probably the University of Michigan is not going to teach a 2-year nanotechnology technician curriculum. But it could be a wonderful opportunity for community college to do that. Another example would be collision avoidance radar in automobiles that's coming. It's already really here, and self-parking vehicles and the cameras in the back of your vehicle. Well, what happens when your collision avoidance radar goes out on your 3-year-old car? Who's going to, where are the collision avoidance radar technicians, and who's training them and teaching them? I think it has to come out of the community college. Engineers can design the stuff, but they probably can't repair it and maintain it.
Do you see them in this initial relationship building, faculty with community colleges, or working with this initial conversation, or which contact
Yes. I have another project right now. I had a project studying about 7 years ago where we saw the automotive thing coming, and we went to the federal government and said, look, there are going to be massive plant closures in the upper Midwest. We're going to see a lot of big automotive plants close because the demand isn't there from the manufacturing. We went down to 10.5 million vehicles from 17 million vehicles. And sure enough, we got a small grant, and about 6 weeks later, Willow Run closed, and Janesville, Wisconsin closed, and Twinsburg, Ohio, and Moraine, Ohio, and on and on. Every month, there were 1 or 2 plant closures. So we worked for 6 years with these communities to kind of a rapid response to get the communities organized and get them thinking about, okay, what's life after GM? Now our challenge is, and I just got a $500,000 grant to do this, I have an inventory of 400 million square feet of empty manufacturing space. And so we've developed profiles of the sites, very detailed, floor column loading and overhead lift capacity and rail spurs and critical infrastructure for the plant. And then we're profiling the community college access to education, technical training, et cetera, et cetera. And we're marketing these things, not from Alabama to move to Indiana, but we're in Brazil, we're working with the State Department, with the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service, with the International Trade Administration, to target foreign companies in foreign countries. We've identified 20 foreign companies that are industrialized and or emerging, and we've identified the top 20 manufacturers in each one of those 20 countries. So we've got a target, an initial target of 400 companies from all over the world, Brazil, South Korea, and I could go on and on, that we think have some incentives to move production into the U.S. There's currency exchanges. There's very long logistics trails on these things. Toyota, when the tsunami and the nuclear reactor thing, their supply chain collapsed. They shut Toyota down for a whole year. They didn't manufacture a single vehicle anywhere in the world. They kept their employees. They brought them in every Friday for 2 hours to have a meeting and then sent them home and come paid. Boeing, look at the Dreamliner. It's a nightmare. They had 435 suppliers all over the world, and when they got everything back to Everett, Washington, and tried to put it together, guess what? It didn't fit. So there are a lot of reasons to be closer to your market and your customers, currency exchange, supply chain, logistics, that kind of thing. So we think we're onto something. It's already working. Our website's up and running, and things are humming along. I'm going to Washington next week. Hopefully we'll extend it for another several years at least. It's called the National Catalog of Excess Manufacturing Capacity, because it's not just a Michigan problem or upper Midwest problem. There are a lot of empty manufacturing facilities around this country. So, my dear friend Janet.
Larry, early on in your talk, you mentioned the Michigan Community College. And you got a program working with them, I think from another community college.
Yeah. Mid-Michigan Community College, Carol Churchill is the president up there. They've established an incubator in Clare, small business incubator, just getting off the ground. Mid-Michigan Community College between Manistee and Ludington, they have an incubator located on campus there now. Alpena Community College, same thing up there. So we're working with the community colleges. I'm also surveying, when we do these things, I am surveying the student population at other community colleges to identify entrepreneurs within the community college, kids that are there in a culinary arts program that want to go out and start some kind of a food-based business. Up in Alpena, interestingly enough, when I was up doing my study up there, I encountered the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary. If you don't know, it's 450 square miles of protected water. Not that you can't fish in it or anything, but there are 250 shipwrecks out there, some of them in 8 feet of water. You can stand in your rowboat and look at them. They just started a marine technology program at the community college. There's 400 to 500 researchers that come from all over the world to Alpena every year, because it's the only freshwater marine sanctuary on the planet, and doing all sorts of interesting research up there. So it was an opportunity to have students up there who, when the researchers came in year-round, they're being employed. The community college infrastructure, what is it, 28 of them? 28? Yeah. I just see that as maybe one of the most important things for Michigan's economy going forward, because that's where the technical training, where the employer-specific training can happen. No, we haven't. This program is 28 months old now, so although, the licensing and they're starting to, I'd say within another 12 months, at least 2 or 3 of these will be out into mass production, if you will, but they'll really be out there. So the data's not there yet. Check with me next year. Okay, I'll be around a little bit if anybody wants to ask any questions, but it's probably time for everybody to get back to their desks. Um,
Well, Larry Molnar, you are a wealth of information on intellectual property and new jobs creation in Michigan and so many other factors like the marine sanctuary, all of the things that we've learned today. These will be available for you on DVD. Mike Blondie, formerly of Michigan Government Television, filmed us today, and we'll have DVDs available. And we will have the PowerPoint available for those who are interested in this excellent information. And on behalf of the Wolverine Caucus and the Alumni Association, I'd like to present to you this pin as a show of our great esteem. Thank you so much
thank
for
you,
this
Veronica.
excellent
Thanks for
presentation.
asking.
Please join me in thanking. Yes. And I hope that you will join us again on Tuesday, April 23rd, when we will have Jim Price here from the School of Business speaking on how do we keep Wolverine entrepreneurs in Michigan. So I hope you'll join us again here at the Chrisman Building on April 23rd. And also, you heard it here, that is the same day of our annual Michigan Alumni Reception in Lansing, when Coach Hoke will be joining us, and that will be at the Radisson Hotel at 5 p.m. So we look forward to seeing you again in April. Happy spring, and go blue. Thank you.